I didn't feel too great when I walked into my local clinic 5 days ago. Now, I'm on my deathbed with no one around but the reporter on the TV. With the world how it is right now, I figured I would go for a checkup. All the health advisories on the news employed me to do so if I felt any sort of sickness. The whole world was unraveling in a sort of hushed chaos. Everyone knew the spread of the virus was rapid, but no one wanted to accept their own mortality in tandem with it. I was the same as everyone else, and still am, even with seeing those in the room adjacent to me meeting their ill Grim Reaper. I still don't believe that I will be next. It's a sick thing to accept. 5 months ago, the world was swept with a virus much like the flu but with seemingly no cure. As the cases soared, along with the death rate, it became apparent that humanity was in trouble. However, no one could accept such a fact as that, as health officials recommended quarantine and advised certain precautions. The world quickly still descended into madness. Major cities burned with looters, and the more rural towns became ghost towns, with occasional small talk of the spiral of mankind. Many of those same health officials and many of the world leaders are dead now. Society was in a hushed denial of the certainty of its downfall. As I walked into the clinic 5 days ago, I too was in the same denial of death. But now, with my end coming quicker than the cure, I'm here alone in my hospital bed with my thoughts. I've had too much time to think about myself and my life, as menial as it was. With many patients in my ward dying by the day, it makes me wonder how long until the bringer of death knocks upon my door. Staring such a thing in the face is horrifying. Staring such a thing in the face alone is impossible. The doctors don't allow visitors, even if I were to have them. I never accepted my immortality, and my inevitable demise. That is why I'm here, alone. Both literally and metaphorically. With no one here to reminisce my life with, I shall do it alone in this painfully plain hospital bed. And I shall die alone, and to myself within the next few days. That's just how life seemed to play out for me. How tragic. 28 hours later, I died. I awoke in my hospital bed to the sound of fervent and incessant groaning. The hospital halls were dimly lit, and my room was dark. No light came from the window. The shades were drawn shut. It was like I was a child again, awoken in the middle of the night to the TV static. I was always afraid of the dark as a child, and the dreadful silence of the night's darkness always unsettled me, just as it did now. I had that same feeling of fear as I stood up from my hospital bed, dragging my IV with me. The night's darkness seemed to pervade the whole hospital. The light seemed to be drained from the bulbs as they tried ever so hard to light my way. The dull clinking of a bad wheel from my IV bag echoed through the dark, damp hallway. I passed by different rooms filled with the groans that had awakened me. Silent weeping, unheard mutterings, and low groans came from everywhere. It was as if I was in some sick nightmare. In the dim light, I could see stains of what seemed like blood on some stretchers strewn about the hallway, as well as on the walls, though no bodies. I saw patients in the waiting room chairs curled up in the fetal position, as well as under tables, and stretchers leaned against the walls. A distant sound of low thunder sounded outside in the darkness. I bounded the corner slowly, using my IV stand both as a cane and a support beam. Under the flickering overhead lights, I met a man in a hospital gown trying the locked double doors of our ward. In no rush to open them, the man just seemed to have no interest in opening the doors, but instead just to hear the click of the lock against the hinges. He turned slowly, and in the dim, flickering lights, I could not make out his face. It seemed opaque and odd, yet very average and unassuming. A raspy voice whispered to me, "Hey, you." He waved his hand over to me, beckoning me to the elevator next to him that couldn't seem to close. Another low rumble of thunder came from outside. The elevator was dim, with a red hue from the emergency light above. A distorted voice came from the speaker as the man clicked the lobby floor button. The elevator creaked and rocked unsteadily as the two of us descended down the hospital. I couldn't quite get a good look at him. On the outside, it was horrifying. The decrepit hospital slowly fell to pieces as we descended down its stone steps. It decayed in silence behind us as we descended. The world was gone, and now I knew where I was. Hell. The low hum and thunder of the abyss echoed endlessly. My guide descended the steps with me. Still as indiscernible in the dim light, then he was in absolute darkness. I did not question where we were going, for I feared my mind would be lost if it found out. A low rumble shook the stone steps we descended ever downwards. It seemed we were a pillar in a chasm far deeper than any ocean or any cave. An open cave with fresh air and wind. The darkness defied the reality of its expanse. It felt as claustrophobic as it did wondrous. I feared what was beyond the scope of my eye and imagination. I feared that if there were to be any light here, it would somehow be worse. Content with this, I descended with my guide, choosing to stay silent as we descended. And descend we did. The spiral stairs never seemed to end. Soon, the stone steps of the immaculate hospital turned to worn and jagged rocks. Soon, I could no longer see my guide, for the darkness had engulfed even the darkest shadow. All I heard were his footsteps on the way ahead of me. His creaking joints and flesh-ridden footsteps pervaded the darkness, more so than the consistent and low thunder that echoed through what I could only assume was the endless valley of death itself. He spoke not a word to me, nor let a single breath leave his lips. Soon, I started to believe that he wasn't there at all. His raspy voice whispered from the blinding darkness. "Stop." I heeded his command. So too did all other things in the dark oblivion. All was silent, following the halt of our footsteps. The sudden shock and halt of all that seemed to anchor me to reality. My sense of sight, hearing, and being almost drove me mad. I heard not a whistle of wind or a pebble fall from the path above. I know not how long I stood in the same spot. The sharp rocks dug into my feet and left their mark. My mouth became dry from dehydration and my breath raspy and broken. Fear had frozen me in time and in place. I did not know if my guide was still in front of me. I did not know if there was some impending doom just beyond my eyesight. Perhaps whatever demon, horror, or unimaginable idea was right here, within arm's reach. Or perhaps behind me, ready to sink its fangs into my worn neck. Or above, ready to swoop down and take me into that dark oblivion. Fear had overtaken me so that I could not even raise my arm to find my way or to brace myself upon the pillar that I had descended so far down. I did not know the fate of my anonymous guide, nor the fate of my own self were I to take any movement. So there I made my ground. The soles of my feet ached and bled. They healed in jagged ways that made the pain almost unbearable. Without the low and hellish hum of my own footsteps, I knew not of anything. drove me mad. The unknown, the imagined horrors of my mind. I sat there in my madness and tortured myself in silence and stillness. My mind eventually played tricks on me. In the darkness, my imagined fears came to life and tormented me from a distance I could not see. The torment and torture was the darkness itself. I felt as though I existed in a realm that did not exist. That I was being in a world where there was no being. Eventually, the madness drove me forward. Now it was my joints that creaked forwards. Whether it was slow or fast, I descended down the next few steps. My footsteps made no echo, nor whisper under me. Suddenly, I felt a sudden warmth next to me. The first feeling I had felt besides pain in what seemed like an eternity. Though this warmth was a horrid and vile kind. My guide! It must have been my guide. The thought of his grotesque physique and odious slime disgusted me and propelled me forward. I ran down the steps, consistently tripping over myself, only to rise even quicker to descend. My footsteps were heard, but there was no echo to follow them. All I heard was the flesh-like steps behind me coming slowly. Slowly were they coming, but fast was I going, yet they still seemed to always be right there behind me. How it is that I would run as if my life depended on it, yet at a snail's pace he could keep up with me. Soon my lungs burned and my legs cramped. I could not stop running for the fear of finding out what truly was behind me. Eventually the torn soles of my feet could carry me no longer, and my legs gave out from under me. I could not recover my sprinting pace. I tried to catch myself in the crag spire of a pillar that seemed to anchor me to existence, but all I was met with was a sharp stone that did not welcome my touch. My hand tore, and my shoulder snapped, and so I fell. The fall itself was exhilarating. It was the most sensation I had felt in an eternity. The vertigo of falling and the pain of constant and debilitating fractures and dislocations. I almost found euphoria in my own destruction. The sound of my guide's feet were long gone. I continued to fall down the pillar's path. As I did, I lost all sense of feeling. Soon there was nothing left to break, and nothing left to feel. I had been falling for so long that I did not know I was. Soon the high of pain and vertigo left me too, and there was left to toss and toil down the steps of hell. Suddenly, I stopped. I felt the cold ground against my cheek. No, it must be an illusion. There was never anything but the stairs. The abrupt change rose me from my dismembered state and propelled me forward. Curious at my new surroundings, of which I had no idea the size or scope, I did not know where this cold ground led. If it ended after one step, or if it never did. I dragged my body across the ice-cold ground. It felt good against my cheek at first, but soon the cold burned my skin. I crawled and crawled. Soon, the thunder resumed to drown out my pitiful groans. The low hum and rumble were welcome to me as it was familiar to me. I continued to crawl and groan to myself. My incessant groaning did nothing for me, yet I could not stop it. I complained, blamed, cursed, bemoaned, pleaded, wept, and yelled into the abyss to no one but myself. Soon my voice gave out, and I was left to the sound of my whimpers and my body dragging across the floor. And finally, I gave in. I stopped crawling, stopped moaning. I stopped. After a while, my body became almost lifeless, with me still in it. I rolled over to face the unknown. All I had known was the stone steps, the imagined horrors, the low thunder and hum, and my own agony. Finally, I looked into the abyss and the unknown, upwards. What I saw was unimaginable, yet heartwarming. The pure evil that suspended in the sky across the tethered oblivion looked down upon me with an insistent grin. Its grotesque lips protruded seemingly forever. Its tendrils seemed downward to entangle me and bring me upwards. As its maroon eyes glared into my soul, the lightning, whose thunder prevailed in the valley of hell, lit up the unfathomable terror above. Its infinite web of nightmarish existence brought only thoughts of wonder to me. I accepted its warm embrace. It was the only thing that was ever real to me. In the light, before this one, I had never known something more orgasmic or delightful. And as I descended upward to hell, I saw it for what it truly was. Angelic.